attacking workers and unions' rights. I mean, we know when Mike Harris was around that he didn't like the unions and that he wasn't progressive and he was the right of the right on the Conservative Party. But he didn't actually run on a platform that said that he was going to go after the unions. We kind of knew what he was up to and what he wasn't saying publicly. But here in this campaign, you had a candidate, Tim Hudak, that felt so confident about his position to say, I'm going to attack unions. That unions shouldn't get involved in political issues and in politics at all. And he attacked the teachers union when they made a contribution so that they could be more engaged and have extra funds to fight back on this election. And he actually said these kind of statements. He said he was going to dismantle and probably try to take away the RAND formula and dismantle and erode our health and safety legislation. He didn't want government to play a role in what happens in the workplaces. He thought that less government was better, that corporations should have more power and authority. And these are the kind of things that he ran on, and he was still building support despite saying these kind of things, despite having more workers in this province than the elite and the powerful, and he was still garnering support. But it was through all your activism, quite frankly, of talking about the importance of elections, of exposing where Tim Hudak was and saying, is this the kind of premier and is this the kind of government that we want in this country? And talking about, the Conservatives had, their policy was called the Change Book, and kind of breaking it apart. And what we found in Hudak's Change Book was that it was pretty much word for word as to Mike Harris's common sense revolution. There was a couple of words changed here and there, but literally it was just a couple of words, but a lot of his policies and platforms were identical to what Mike Harris had wanted to do and had started to erode and break apart, but wasn't successful yet, and Hudak would have come in to continue eroding workers' rights and social progressive legislation. So I want to thank all of you for being involved, for engaging in politics, for voting, quite frankly. It would have been nicer to see more of the Ontario public get out and vote. What we've seen, and we'll take it, but Dalton McGuinty also didn't get elected by the majority of the popular vote. And although he's not the best premier and the best, coming from the best party, he is better than the Conservative Party, and that's what we were trying to do, at least in the CAW, trying to stop the Conservatives from getting elected. And he got elected with a minority of the vote, with about 37% of the popular vote. But at least here we see that the Liberals ended up with a minority government, which I think we have to take our successes, even if they're in small doses, because at least with a Liberal minority government, we can try to agitate, we can work closely with the New Democratic Party and try to ensure that we're pushing the provincial Liberals to the left and not to the center or to the center right. So we've got this ability to do this. What we've seen through the federal elections, even though Harper won a majority government, was that there was more votes that shifted to the left. And of course we've seen this with the federal New Democrats winning as the official opposition in Ottawa. That in fact the shift in the majority of the popular vote did end up being towards the left, but because of our electoral system and they weren't all based in certain ridings, it kind of got spread out across the country. It ends up that they didn't win even more seats, and that's how Stephen Harper got his majority government. So, I think that kind of transpired into the provincial elections. If we look at what happened right across the country, it's actually a year of incumbents. Where, when you look at Manitoba, for example, you have an NDP government re-elected. You have, in Ontario, we have, the Liberals re-elected. And throughout a number of different provinces, you have a lot of the same parties that were re-elected. And that's kind of good and bad. And if we want to look at the glass half full, I say it's not a bad thing because, of course, through the Canadian Labour Congress and through all of the different affiliates, you've been working on the Canada Pension Campaign to improve and double CPP benefits. And if at the end of the day we had a changeover of a number of provincial governments, and if there were more conservative governments, we would have had to start all over on that pension campaign, because that campaign is not dead yet, right? We had to get the federal government on board, but also 2/3 of the provinces, which you have to get Ontario on board to change that legislation to improve the Canada Pension Plan. And just out of curiosity, how many folks know and have been involved in that campaign to improve the CPP? Okay, so I'm going to maybe just take another minute or so on that campaign, since not everybody is aware of it. So for the last 18 months or so, with the Canadian Labour Congress, and I see we've got Gogi and Federico here from the Canadian Labour Congress joining the awards tonight as well. They've been pushing to have an improvement on the Canada Pension Plan, because what was recognized is that the vast majority of Canadians do not have a privately negotiated pension plan, as many of us are fortunate to have, as many of us have because we belong to a union. And even those who do have a union, not everyone has a negotiated pension plan, quite frankly, just because you have a union. There is, you know, an overwhelming majority, I can't remember the exact stats, but somewhere up in the 75, 76% of trade unionists who are fortunate to have a negotiated pension plan, but there are those who don't. And then there are the majority of Canadians overall who don't have anything beyond a Canada Pension Plan. And so what we've been working on is to improve CPP, the publicly funded, the stable pension plan system that's portable, that's indexed to inflation, that most workers are covered by. And in fact, Jim Flaherty, the federal finance minister, even admitted that it's stable for the next 75 years. And of course, what we've seen with the recession recently is people losing their money, their hard-earned money that they've invested into their RSPs, you know, dropping, or the vast majority of Canadians who don't have extra money at the end of their paychecks to put into an RSP system. So we've been working to push provincial and federal governments to improve the Canada Pension Plan. And it also helps all of us who have negotiated pension plans in our workplace, because we are under pressure, and you know best when you're at the bargaining table that employers, whether you're public or your private sector, are hounding down to try to take as much away, and pension plans are one of the big items that employers, both public and private, want to try to do away with. And so if we can raise that standard and raise the benefits of our Canada Pension Plan system, not only for all of us, but for the future, for our kids, for our grandkids, for unionized workers, for non-unionized workers, we can raise that playing field, you can alleviate some of the pressure at the bargaining table, and we would end up, you know, it's a win-win situation in terms of having those additional benefits when we're ready to retire and after our many decades of hard work. So that campaign is not over, and the good news is that because a number of the provinces who have already agreed, a number of them have been re-elected. So we don't have to redo the work and try to get the provinces and new provinces on board, because a number of the past parties or premiers and finance ministers are re-elected. So we now need to work on the federal government still. So it won't be any easy task, of course, trying to get the federal government on board. But if there is enough pressure through the provinces, and if we can keep Dalton McGuinty and Dwight Duncan because they said that they were supportive before the election, if we can make them stay on course and continue to say that they will support an improvement and a doubling of the benefits of the Canada Pension Plan system, I believe, as a labour movement, that will be a success for us in the very near future. And we, you know, it's something that's actually possible. And sometimes it seems that things are so far away and it may not be possible, but this is a campaign, sisters and brothers, that I think that we can win, but we can't win it without continued involvement and continued activism on it. So I'm sure you'll hear more. I know you'll hear more through the Canadian Labour Congress, but I'm sure you'll hear more from your different unions as well. And so, you know, what's great with what happened through the different elections, and a bit of a slap in the face, I think, to some of the conservative parties throughout, is what we've seen, you know, in the occupying movement. That we've seen that, as I've mentioned, that the vote in the federal election was more to the left than actually to the right. And what we're seeing, of course, is that groundswell of people saying, you know what, enough is enough, of corporations getting too much of the economic pie, of governments not representing the workers, the voters, the citizens of this country, but instead representing the corporations. And that's what we're starting to see. And if we can translate what's happening with the Occupy movements, supporting the occupying movements, but also translating that into what we can do to keep pushing governments and our elected officials. Talking and having a relationship with your MPPs and your MPs and with your city councillors can make an absolute difference. If they know you live in their riding and that you're a voter for that person and they're not representing your values and what you want them to do or to vote on, then it can make a difference, because they'll get a little bit nervous if enough of you out here in the Oakville region start shaking it up a little bit more. And that's what it'll take. And so I encourage you to keep shaking things up and build these relationships. You may not like the conservative, politicians out here, or you may not like the Liberal MPP that you have, or you might like them, who knows. But, have a relationship regardless. It's a working relationship. Let them know who you are, that you are a union activist, and let them know the things that you believe in, so that they can be held accountable and they can't just say, oh, I didn't know about it, or I wasn't aware about it. So I encourage you to get involved. And I guess, one a good piece of news as well, very recently, if you've been following U.S. politics, you've probably heard the attacks that they've been having in Wisconsin and in Ohio, and they've had some recent votes to repeal a bill in Ohio, and it didn't look like that they were going to be successful with the Republican politicians down there, and they were also building up support as well. And over the many years, workers in the United States were being attacked. Public sector workers were losing their jobs. They were contracting out or privatizing their work. They were also trying to take the rights away around union workers, rights away to try to organize workplaces, trying to take the right away for workers to have the ability to strike. And all these things were at stake, and it was because of many, many years where workers kept getting a little nervous, and they says, okay, well, maybe we'll let this part kind of go, or okay, they're going to take a little bit, and we'll fight back a little, but, they kind of let things slide over the many years, and finally they were at a place where it was really serious, and that they were up to lose a whole heck of a lot more than they've already lost. And they had a vote recently in Ohio, and they won that vote, 62% to 38%, and I think that's a huge victory. So now the Republicans down in the U.S. are starting to think twice about attacking labor union rights. And thank goodness that they won that vote, because had they have lost that vote, a lot of unions belong to international unions. Some of that has been starting to trickle into Canada, and it would have continued to trickle into all of our unions, whether you belong to a Canadian union or an international union, because the politics and the kind of things that they were doing down there is starting to move up north up here. Dave mentioned how I'm on the Toronto Labour Council Executive Board, so I know the kind of work and things that you're trying to do here at the Oakville Labour Council. And we have challenges in the city of Toronto where we've got a crazy mayor, a conservative mayor, and I don't know what we did in Toronto. I mean, I love my city, and I kind of think it's the center of the universe, but you can bash us because Torontonians really screwed up. We elected someone so pathetic. And here he is now trying to do some of the same things that's happening in the United States. He's already gotten the support of the City Council in Toronto, where CUPE members have lost, they think it's going to be close to 1,000 jobs if we can't fend off some of it. But we know that they've already lost 400 jobs in the waste management collection. And they've contracted out and privatized that. There's a lot more things at stake as they're bargaining in the city of Toronto, from their library services to their parks and recs, to the childcare services and so on. And so we're up for a battle. And so the news that happened in Ohio is a little bit of a breath of fresh air. We're going to take some lessons of what they did to build some ground swelling and some support. And there was a huge amount of activism. and millions of dollars, quite frankly, that was spent to educate the broader public, to get them out there to vote, to come out and vote on this bill out in Ohio. And that's what it might take. It's almost like another election. When public sector workers go to the bargaining table in the city of Toronto. And you might say, well, geez, Jenny, we're in Oakville. Like, why are you talking about Toronto, right? Like, we don't really care. Well, you know, I raised Toronto because if Toronto loses all these public sector jobs, if they contract out all these jobs, don't think that they're not coming to other municipalities, right? It won't be just Toronto. It will be a whole host of other cities that will lose services, that will lose workers, and that will lose good full-time jobs that have benefits and that have pension plans. So don't let that kind of trickle into what's happening here. Pay attention to what's happening in Toronto. Be supportive where you can, because it does absolutely make a difference. And so QP workers will be in bargaining. They're in bargaining currently, and then they could possibly be out on strike as of January 19th. And I know that they don't want to go out on strike if they don't have to, of course, and we all know that. We don't want to strike unless it's absolutely necessary. But they are up against a really tough regime in the city of Toronto. But all the unions, through the Labour Council, are working with QP to see what we can do to support one another, to send the message out to our members and to our family about what's at stake. And it's a really important conversation I think we have to have right across the country around the importance of public services and why we want to keep public services public. And even if we belong to private sector unions, we have to have that conversation. We have to talk about why taxes are not a bad thing, but taxes are a good thing to have. It provides us our public health care system. It provides us our education system. It provides us with our community centers. I know as a new mother, as I've been out, taking my daughter to different things, and I'm fortunate, I could take her to the swimming pool, I could take her to the community centers and things like that without having to pay all the additional service fees and charges if I didn't have the access to these public city-run services. So we have to talk about these sort of things, I believe, and keep talking about it because we haven't been doing it enough. So let's talk about the importance of public sector jobs around having good quality full-time jobs that are not precarious, that have benefits and have pension plans. I had an opportunity to speak at York University last night to some students, and I talked kind of similar things around why politics are important and why they need to get involved, and unions are great and all that kind of stuff, right? And so then I asked them, how many of you, when you graduate school, think that you're going to get a full-time job that has some benefits and a pension plan? The entire classroom, not one single hand went up. They get it, but it's so sad because they get the fact that they cannot strive to think that they're going to have a full-time job with benefits. And this is our future. These are our young folks. And I know you probably think, oh yeah, I'm young, even though Dave keeps bugging me that I'm old. But really, these are our young folks. And it's really just devastating when I thought maybe a couple of people would have been hopeful. A couple of people would have had their hands up and thought that they could get a full-time permanent job, but not one single student raised their hand. And I says, well, do you think that's acceptable? And why are you not doing something? And then I asked, how many of you have voted in the last election? And about a third of them, maybe a little over a third of them, but not quite half the room had voted. So I said, well then, and I gave them a little bit of shit, and I said, well, if you didn't vote, and you want to get a full-time job, then like, how do you think you're going to get it? You can't just think it's going to come landing to you. You got to get out there, you got to get involved, and I tried to connect the dots, but it's the new reality, unfortunately, and I think we really have to try to change that because our parents and grandparents before us changed that so we can have good full-time union jobs, and now it's upon us to do that for the future of the kids and the grandkids so that they actually know and believe that they can have good quality full-time jobs in their future. So there's a lot of things for us to do, and I know there's all the awards, so I'm going to leave it as that and encourage all of you to continue your activism, and thank you for your activism and all your hard work, because together I know we can make a difference and we can change the world. So thank you.